Hi, I'm Ryan Szymanski, curator for Battleship, New Jersey Museum and Memorial. Today we've got another video in our museum-y series in honor of the ship being a museum now for 20 years. All the videos this week are focused on museum-y topics. Today's video is going to be on a museum's core documents. So we're going to talk about the 5 core documents that every museum should have. So if you're somebody out there who's interested in museums, thinking about starting your own museum, or otherwise interested in how people like me make the decisions we make and if they're arbitrary or not, this might be an interesting video for you. So these 5 core documents are recommended by the American Alliance of Museums. AAM sets the industry standards for establishing best practices, and best practices are what all museums aspire to. So they say that every museum should have 5 core documents. Those are your mission statement, your collections management plan, your institutional code of ethics, your strategic plan, and your emergency response plan. And there are many other documents that a good museum will produce, but those 5 are the bare minimum, and most of us don't have them, or at the minimum we don't have them up to date. So we're going to talk a little bit about that too. So first of all, your mission statement. Your mission statement is the most important document that your museum will produce. And it should inform every single decision that you make from there on out. Often, a mission statement is just 1 sentence long. The shorter, the better. And any of your other documents should reference that, and any decisions you make should go back to, hey, does this fall into our mission statement or not? So Battleship New Jersey's mission statement boils down to preserving the ship and educating the public. Those are the 2 main tenets. It's got a whole sentence thing written there, but preserving the ship, educating the public. So anything we think about doing, we have to think about in the context of those 2 things. Are we going to have to significantly alter or damage the ship in order to do this new thing? Well, then is it worth it? So for example, right now, we're sitting in one of the exhibit spaces on the main deck. This was a berthing space. Crew members called this home, and the museum made a decision to gut this space and convert it into something else. So that's not preserving the ship. We have destroyed a part of it. But it is educating the public. So we have other examples of berthing spaces around the ship that are preserved, and we needed some way to educate the public. We needed exhibit spaces to be a museum. So the Halsey Theater here was created, and the rest of the exhibits on main deck. And so that fits within our mission statement. If, for example, somebody came to us with an object or an idea, hey, I've got one of Vincent van Gogh's paintings here. I'm going to give it to you. Does that support our mission? It is a valuable piece of artwork. It is historically significant. It belongs in a museum. But does that help us educate the public about the battleship? Does it help us preserve the battleship in any way? No. So that informs that decision. Somebody's saying they want to partner with us to make a Vincent van Gogh museum. Again, that doesn't fit with what we're doing here. So this mission statement informs every decision that we make. Even though it's the shortest of all these documents by far, it takes a long time to get a mission statement to say what the board and what the senior staff want it to say for the museum to be what it's supposed to be. Alongside mission statements are also vision and value statements. And these are often paired with them. I didn't list them as separate documents. Here at Battleship New Jersey, we consider our mission, vision, and value statements to be all more or less the same thing, even though they're all separate documents. They can all be written on a single sheet of paper. So your vision statement is fleshing out your mission statement a little bit more. What do you want to be? And it's usually about a paragraph long. It's a couple of sentences. And your value statement are a couple of bullet points about what your museum values. So the value statement is really a series of bullet points about what your institution values. So we're a military museum. So one of our bullet points is that we will respect and be an asset for veterans. Like, no-brainers. None of this stuff should be a surprise. When you're reading an institution's mission, vision, and value statements, there shouldn't be anything in there that gives you a second thought. They're going to be very different for another sort of gallery, library, archive, or museum than they are for a museum ship. But they're going to be. But there shouldn't be any surprises there for that type of institution. So our next major core document, and the one that I as a curator find most important, is the collections management plan. So basically, this is a document that says what your institution is going to collect as artifacts and how you're going to care for it. And it'll also lay out contingencies for, say, how do we dispose of things in the collection that no longer fit our mission. So that brings up another important point. You don't produce these documents and then walk away from them and they're complete and that's how your museum is going to be forever. Your museum has to continue to evolve and you should be reviewing your core documents. Some institutions do it every year. That's really great. I wish we had the time to do that. I wish we had the time to produce all 5 of these core documents, much less review them annually. But every couple of years you should be looking at these and deciding, yeah, now that we've started to do this, what we had written in the collections management plan doesn't really work. Or we've changed our mission statement, and so that changes what we're going to collect. So we need to change our collections management plan accordingly. So these are all supposed to be living documents that you reference frequently and that you go through and update frequently. And usually it is the staff that are updating these, and then the board of directors will then review them and approve that, yeah, we are the governing body of this institution, and we agree with these changes. It's not a rogue curatorial staff or a rogue executive director changing the whole purpose of the museum. My favorite museum ship is the Coast Guard Cutter Taney, so Battleship New Jersey Museum and Memorial is going to become a shrine to the Coast Guard Cutter Taney. Now, there are things in place to keep that from happening. So, the collections management plan tells you how to dispose of artifacts. Maybe they've been damaged. Maybe somebody collected them at some point in the past and they don't really fit the mission statement. All of these guidances that myself, the curator, and the other curatorial staff members need. And even has a list of what you do. How do you accession an object? So somebody brings an artifact for us to donate. What do we do with it? How do we accept it? How do we log it into the system? Like what is our numbering system for that? So some of this is real minutia, and some of it's real high-minded stuff. Battleship New Jersey will collect virtually anything related to Battleship New Jersey. But do we collect things related to the state of New Jersey's military history? Do we collect things related to other battleships, other World War II warships? If somebody walked in here with something from the battleship Bismarck, would we take it? All of these questions are supposed to be answered by the collections management plan. And it would also say what the scope of the collection is. So we do not collect Vincent van Gogh artwork. We collect things related to Battleship New Jersey. Now, if there is a painting of Battleship New Jersey, that probably can fall into the scope of our collection. That said, we're not an art museum. Do we have the facilities to be able to care for certain types of artifacts? Because we hold these artifacts in the public trust. So something donated to us, we need to preserve for as long as we can. I'm not an art historian. I have no training with maintaining artwork. So if somebody brings us a painting, we have to think long and hard of, does this fit our mission? Is there somewhere we can display this? Do we have a way of conserving or preserving this long term? Or is the only reason to take it that it would be hung in someone's office? Well, that doesn't benefit our mission at all. So, there's a lot of questions to ask, and a good collections management plan will answer all of those. So, AAM has standards for your collections policy and how you're preserving objects and what you're doing with them. And these, again, they're best practices. They're not necessarily something that small museums like Battleship New Jersey can do all of. We don't have a building. So we can't store our artifacts in as safe of a spot as we should be able to. We've got a battleship, so we've got spaces on the battleship for storing those artifacts. Now the problem is there's plumbing in just about every space on the ship, particularly if the space has climate control. So AAM's best practices says that, yeah, you should have climate control. You want to keep your artifacts stored at a certain temperature, and that temperature shouldn't fluctuate much, and the humidity shouldn't fluctuate much. All right, piece of cake. But on a battleship with 80-year-old plumbing, that might cause us issues. AAM also says, maybe don't put your collection somewhere that can flood and damage your artifacts. That's real valuable advice. But where on a battleship doesn't have the threat of flooding at some point as the ship gets 80, 90, 100, 150 years old? So our space doesn't necessarily meet the standards entirely, but like every other museum, we try to come as close as we possibly can with the resources we have. So next up, we have an institutional code of ethics. Ethics, obviously, are very important. And honestly, this one falls out of the scope of what I'm responsible for. So this will be a shorter discussion than, say, the collections management plan. But the code of ethics tells you what you should and shouldn't do as an employee, volunteer, or trustee of the museum. The one that always resonates with me as the collections person is one of the bullet points in the code of ethics is you're not going to collect in competition with the museum where you work. So I'm into battleships, as you may or may not have figured out. So I have a personal collection of models and parts and things from battleships. Ton of books. I get a lot of these things on eBay and other places where you bid. So I cannot collect in competition with the battleship. So if an artifact relating to Battleship New Jersey comes up to bid on eBay and I want it, and the curatorial committee of the board says, hey, we should get that for a new exhibit on the battleship, none of the staff of the museum should be bidding on that to try and get it, and then forcing the museum to pay more. Like, if there, let's say that there's a battleship patch on eBay that I'm interested in right now, what I would do is check with the other curatorial staff and be like, hey, we've got one of these in the collection already, right? This is a reproduction. This doesn't relate to the actual ship. It's not an important artifact. Okay. And the curatorial committee says there's nothing wrong with this. So, all right, I can buy that. Hey, there's a boxed Revell model of Battleship New Jersey. I can buy that. The museum has one that's been donated. It's not built. It's not anything famous or unique. So in that instance, I can collect. I can buy books on Battleship New Jersey. But if it's, say, a cruise book that was produced by the battleship, maybe I would need to check in on that. And likewise, so our collections management plan says we can deaccession objects from the collection if we go through certain steps. Well, let's say, we've got this really great book in the collection that's out of print and I can't get a copy of it. Well, I'm going to say that this museum doesn't need this book so that I can acquire it. That would be a big no-no. So if we do deaccession that, museum staff cannot be the ones that acquire that. Let's say it is something that we are able to sell, okay, and we sell. Nobody in the museum staff or family members, relatives, whatnot from the museum staff can then acquire it. So that's something that shows up in the Code of Ethics. And there's all sorts of other stuff relating to other departments, what you're going to do with human resources and accounting and this and that and the other thing. But that all falls pretty far outside my scope, so I won't speak to it. So next up, we've got the strategic plan. And this one's kind of polarizing. Some people think that it's one of the most important of these 5, and some people think you don't need it at all. Many museums, and many museum ships in particular, being smaller institutions with huge preservation needs, are too busy dealing with the here and now. How do I put out this fire that's just started today to plan for something that's going to be 5 or 10 years in the future? And that's common. We all face it. However, staff like myself should be dealing with putting out fires. Staff like the executive director and the board of trustees should be looking at the long-term goals of the museum. Where do we want to be in 5 years, 10 years, 20 years? And there's a lot of different theories on this. Do you want a strategic plan that looks out to the next century? Or do you just want one that's telling you what you're going to do in the next 5 years? What are your goals over the next 5-year period? Some people say, things are going to change so much over this time. Why plan 100 years out? Because we completed a strategic plan here at Battleship New Jersey, or we updated our strategic plan about 2 years ago. And we have, we went pretty short. It's only covering the next 5 or 10 years. We've got a list of things we wanted to do and a timetable for accomplishing them. And then the pandemic struck. And you can throw all that right out the window. We spent 2 years just trying to survive. So now everything on that plan is pushed back at least 2 years. What sort of stuff is on that plan? Well, we aspire to be more than just the Battleship Museum. So we want to look at expanding our museum footprint. So start collecting objects that might fall beyond the scope of our current collections management plan. Oh, well, that means we've got to revise that. And our mission statement. There's practically nowhere to eat here in Camden. We want guests to come on board and spend the whole day touring the museum. But how do we do that if we're not providing amenities? We have to have bathrooms for them to use. We have to have somewhere for them to eat. So we do not currently have much in the way of food service. So that is something that we aspire to do over the course of the strategic plan. And that was one of the earliest steps we wanted to do. That was something that was supposed to happen a year or so ago. But with the pandemic, we're not doing food service to begin with, much less creating a whole new food service installation on our campus. So this got pushed back, but as we emerge from the pandemic next year, that's probably going to be one of the top steps, is how can we address food service. Now, very important with most of these documents, but particularly the strategic plan, is getting feedback from your community. What's your community? Your community could mean many different things. Our YouTube channel here is a community, and that community is spread out all over the world, but have in common that we're all watching the YouTube channel for some reason. For the Battleship, we have the community of the ship's crew. who, again, they're spread out all over the place, but they have that thing in common. We have the community of our local Camden, Philadelphia area community, people who have to live and work with and interact with the Battleship next door. We've got the museum's supporter community, which are donors and people who come and visit all the time and whatnot. And they might not be locals, but they're the sorts of people who are into visiting museum ships. So we need feedback from all of these different communities as we craft our strategic plan. So if our local Camden, Philadelphia area folks are saying, hey, there's nowhere for us to eat in the entire area, much less when we visit the museum, if you get a food service installation of some sort, put it on the landside part of your campus so we can just walk up and eat there, as opposed to on the ship where we'd have to buy a ticket to come up and eat there. That informs our decision making. If the local community is saying, hey, we love the museum, we love what you do, you make way too much noise. The events you have on board, the music's too loud, or you're firing the guns too often. You're firing the guns in the middle of the night, wakes us up, causes all sorts of problems. So we've got to work with them to, hey, let's restrict how much powder we're using. Let's restrict the volume of the music during our events. So being a good partner, working with the community is all part of the strategic plan. So input is a very important part of that process. Easily another contender for the most important plan is the emergency response plan. So this is fairly self-explanatory. What do you do in every possible negative situation that could happen? Like, what is your institution's response to this? If the ship starts to flood, that's not a great time for me to be looking up, okay, so what are some local companies that I might be able to rent a pump from to fix the ship? Well, all that information should be there. Who does underwater welding so we can patch this hole? So there's all sorts of different disasters that can hit your museum. What if there's a hurricane in the area? What do we do at that point? This is a real big one for the Gulf Coast ships. It might damage their ship. It might damage their collections that are shoreside. It might damage their collections, their artifacts that they have loaned out to other institutions that are also in Hurricane Alley. Like, what do you do if there's a storm? We got to get all the collections up on the ship, because if it isn't safe there, well, there's nowhere it is safe. Right? We've got to double up our mooring lines and make sure the ship doesn't drift out to sea. We've got to make sure that there is staff on board to monitor the situation, or make sure there's nobody on board. Who cares if something happens to the ship as long as nobody gets hurt? And the different plans like this have to be discussed. What if we do if there's a fire on board? Have we worked with the local fire department so that they know where there's water connections on or near the ship? Have we given them blueprints of the ship? Do they know what the tour route is so that when they come to sweep the ship and make sure everyone is safe, they know where to actually go? Disasters might not be just fire and flooding. What if it's a reputation issue? What if our servers are hacked and held for ransom? Well, what do we do then? How frequently are we backing these up? Who do we call if that happened? There's all sorts of different things that need to be thought of and accounted for in this. What if we get mold or bugs in the collection space? Those can eat all of our documents and photographs. Like, what's our solution there? Where do we take those things to deal with them? So, those are our 5 core documents. There are, of course, other important ones. Every department should probably have some sort of core document. For curatorial, it's the collections management plan. For the education department, which I also run with, there should be an education plan or an interpretive plan. What time period are we displaying the ship in? Under what circumstances are we going to vary from that time period? We've talked about that a lot in other videos. Are we doing STEM education on board? Are we doing history education on board? Like, what sort of programs are we going to aim for? Well, what fits our mission statement best? So there are, of course, other core documents that your museum should produce, but those 5 that we talked about are the core 5 that you should start with before you branch out to other ones. And like I said, museums, ours included, are too busy putting out fires in the day-to-day to produce and update these all the time. So there is certainly the Glass Castle standards. This is where we want to be. And then there's where we actually are. And we certainly aspire to have all 5 of these completed and updated every 2 years. But even though I'm up here on my bully pulpit talking about how that's how we need to do it, we aren't. We've got 3 of the 5 up to date right now. And we haven't updated them so far in the past that we've had a chance to, or we haven't written them so far in the past that we've had a chance to update them yet. So I can't even tell you if when the 2-year mark hits, yeah, we're done, we did it. We have actually updated these documents every 2 years like we wanted to, or something came up and we weren't able to do it. We've had a lot of tours and no tour guides, so all the senior staff are giving tours and we haven't had a chance to do this. Or we're planning to go into dry dock and that's eating up everybody's time. We don't have time to sit down and talk about core documents. So it's what we want. It's not exactly what we have. So if you work for a museum, your museum doesn't have this, it's not the end of the world, but certainly aspire to it. Which of the 5 core documents do you think is most important? Let us know in the comment section down below and why you think that is. I'd be interested to hear what you as an outsider think, and I'd be interested to hear if my discussion weighted certain ones above others. We'd like to hear back from you. Battleship New Jersey receives operating support from the New Jersey Department of State and also from a number of other private and businesses, private individuals and businesses. So we really appreciate the support. There's a link in the description to support us if you would like to make a donation to the museum. You can also support our museum by liking, sharing, and subscribing so more people find out about the work we're doing and the channel. Thanks for watching.